Hello, and welcome to our Musculoskeletal Injury Prevention webinar on office ergonomics. This session is brought to you by the Alberta Municipal Health and Safety Association and presented by EWI Works. For additional resources, please visit amhsa.devcogroup.com.
I know it's a busy time of year. Everyone's trying to get their year-end stuff done and hopefully wrap up for some time out of the office over the holidays. So I appreciate you taking some time to join us this morning. As Rob said, we're scheduled for 90 minutes. The presentation itself will not be that long, probably be 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll have lots of time for questions, and I'm more than happy to answer those. I am going to turn my camera off while I'm presenting, and then I'll turn it back on when we get to the Q&A section. All right. So, little agenda for us today. I'm going to talk about what musculoskeletal injuries are, what the risk factors are. We're going to look at spend the majority of our time looking at setup tips for each area of the body. I'm going to show you some examples from a traditional office and also provide some home office tips. We're going to speak specifically to laptops because lots of folks are using laptops now. We'll get into the importance of movement, and then at the end, I'll share some resources with you. And I know Rob has an email that will be going out with links to all the resources we'll talk about as well. So really, as an ergonomist, what I'm looking to do is prevent musculoskeletal injuries, or MSIs. So those are injuries affecting the bones, muscles, tendons, ligaments, and nerves, and they're typically associated with repetition, forceful work, or awkward posture. And for the types of injuries that I'm interested in as an ergonomist, they tend to be things that occur over time, right? They're not an acute injury. They're injuries that develop over several days, several weeks, sometimes several years. Okay. And when these injuries occur in our work environment, we tend to describe them as work-related MSIs. There's a number of different terms that you will hear used for them: musculoskeletal disorders, cumulative trauma disorders, overuse injuries, repetitive strain injuries. There's all kinds of different terms, and the terms mean slightly different things, but we're more or less talking about the same classification of injuries. So how these injuries develop, and I like this graphic here. I think it gives a good illustration of how they develop. So if we think of the red line on the top of this graphic as our tissue's capacity. So tissues in our body could be, we're generally talking about soft tissues here. So muscles, tendons, ligaments, right? The red line at the top of this graphic is our tissue's capacity. The blue line at the bottom is the demands that we're placing on it. So we can see some different activities here. We're sitting in a fairly neutral posture, not a whole lot of demand. It's not really impacting my tissue's capacity. If I move to the next graphic to the right, the individual's kind of in a slouched posture. In that example, we're probably putting more demand on there, and we can see the red line is closing in on the blue line a little bit more because there's been greater demand placed on it. We get to something where we're sweeping, or maybe we're shoveling, where the demands are higher and there's peaks and valleys. We can see that we're putting more demand against that capacity. And again, the red and blue lines are getting closer. We have a period of time where we're resting and the demands are very low or nil. So that's our tissue's time to recover. And we can see that the tissue's capacity increases again. And again, as we go to the right, we can see more demands are being placed on it. And at a certain point, if we don't have enough of a recovery phase, or the demands exceed our capability to recover, when those two lines meet, that's where we have an injury occur, because the demands placed on there have exceeded the tissue's capacity. And again, we're talking soft tissues here, so muscles, tendons, ligaments. So that's kind of one way of thinking of how these injuries to our body occur. And for those of us that work in an office environment, we're not going to have those huge demands placed on them like we might see in an industrial environment, but we still do stuff outside of work. We could be shoveling. We could have a little side project at home where we're getting these larger demands placed on us. And there are still demands placed on our tissues when we're working in an office environment as well. So when we look at what leads to injuries, we've got the biomechanical risk factors, which we'll talk to here shortly. There's organizational risk factors, so how our work is designed. And then we all have personal risk factors. Some examples of those could be we've had a previous injury, could be the kind of physical shape that we're in. As we age, our physical capacity decreases, so our chance of being injured increases as well. So all these things combine to potentially lead to a musculoskeletal injury or illness. So when we look at the biomechanical risk factors, there's three primary risk factors that we're concerned with. We're concerned with posture, force, and then repetition or duration. So while you're listening in here, I'd like you to stand up for a minute, and I'm going to do the same thing on my end. I want you to just stand there and think about, when we're standing, we're in a fairly neutral posture. There's no extra forces put on us. If we've been standing for, 15 or 20 seconds now, that amount of duration is not going to cause us any discomfort. Okay. I'd like you to change your posture now. I want you to pretend that you've got some work out in front of you. So I want you to put your hands straight out in front of your shoulders. And if you have a shoulder issue or that bothers you, please put your hands down. But otherwise, I want you to keep them up there. So what we've done now is we've introduced an awkward posture. For a short period of time, it's probably not bothering you. If I asked you to hold that for 30 seconds or a minute, most of you are probably going to be able to do it. If I asked you to do it longer than that, you're going to become uncomfortable. Your shoulders are going to become sore. Your arms are going to become sore, right? If I asked you to hold 10 pounds at arm's length, again, that discomfort and the displeasure associated with that is going to set in a little bit quicker. Okay, so you can put your arms down now if you've been playing along with me here. But the purpose of that is, awkward posture for a short period of awkward posture alone doesn't really bother us. If we have an awkward posture and we do it for long enough, it's going to bother us. Or if we have an awkward posture and we combine it with a higher force, it's going to bother us sooner. So it's always this combination of risk factors that causes us an issue. And in the office environment, it tends to be an awkward posture that's not an extreme awkward posture. It might only be slightly awkward, but we tend to be in the office for 6, 7, 8, 9 hours a day. So if we have that posture that's a little bit off and we're doing it for a long period of time and we're doing it on a daily basis, even without force or even without high force, it's going to cause us a problem at some point. So kind of what I want you to take from that little exercise is if you go through this training and you go, oh, gee, I only have a couple minor things to change, or I only need to adjust things an inch here or an inch there. That inch here or inch there can make a big difference come the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the month, the end of the year, right? Like those little changes combined for how long some of us are in an office environment can make a big difference. All right. So kind of how I've got this structured, we're going to go through each of the areas of the body. I'm going to show you some examples of common concerns that we see, and then I'm going to show you how we want to get set up. So when we look at awkward postures of the leg, if we start on the left side of your screen, here we've got someone that's raised themselves up so that they're at a good height for their upper body, but their feet aren't able to touch the floor. So if we've got the weight of our legs hanging off the chair, we're going to get some discomfort on the underside of our leg. Common solution for this, we see in the middle picture where, again, this individual's raised themselves up to a good height, but they are now tucking their legs underneath to have their feet supported. So they've got their feet supported, but their legs are their knees in a really awkward posture there, and they're going to have more contact stress on the underside of the leg as well as the back of their calf, and that's uncomfortable. So, lots of desks are at fixed height at 29 or 30 inches. If you're a little bit shorter, chances are you need to raise your chair up to achieve a good height for the upper body. And then, we have some awkward leg postures. The picture on the right is a little bit a less common example, but let's say we had a work surface that is too short for someone. So this individual's lowered their chair to get their upper body in a good position. And now we can see their knees are a little higher than their hips. A good portion of their leg is unsupported. When we've got our knees positioned higher than our hips, that pulls on our lower back a little bit and can certainly lead to some low back and hip discomfort. And then the underside of our upper leg is unsupported, and that will fatigue over time. So contact stress or external trauma is a kind of a common leg issue. Picture on the left, we kind of saw on the previous slide. Again, you get a good example there where the weight of those legs is hanging off the front of the chair, and we're going to get more compression on the underside of our leg. Picture on the right, again, probably common for some of you that are a little shorter in stature. This individual, when they sit all the way back, the front of the chair is making contact with the back of their knee. And most people find that annoying to start with. And then, depending on how firmly they're sitting back against the chair, that compresses the soft tissue on the back of the leg and can have an impact on blood circulation and other issues as well. So these are two things that are, there are things we can do to fix that, but common issues that we'll see. So when we talk about setup, first thing I'm interested in when I'm looking at somebody's setup, and I usually kind of go feet up, is I want their feet to be supported. So that can be flat on the floor, that can be using a footrest like we see on the right side, because this person's raised their chair to work on, to get their upper body in line with the work surface where they need to be. Either of these is fine, right? The main thing is we need to have our feet supported, and we don't want to have them supported on top of the casters underneath our chair like we saw a couple slides ago. So either of these are fairly easy to achieve. A footrest is not an expensive accessory. You can get them for as little as $25. You could get ones that are, $100 and have heat in them and all this kind of stuff. But generally, if we're wearing shoes, some of those extra bells and whistles that they put on them are not a necessary item. All right. So with the legs, like I said, the main thing that we're interested in is the height of the chair, and that we can get our feet flat on the floor, and then also the fit of that seat pan. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. So next, I'd like to look at the back. In the office environment, the back is certainly an area we hear lots of complaints about. Couple things lead to that. Folks who've had a back injury before are more susceptible to having a back injury again. And then, work in an office environment is often fairly sedentary, meaning we don't get a whole lot of movement. Lack of movement can also increase our risk of developing back pain as well. So when we look at the causes for back discomfort, awkward or twisted postures is certainly near the top of that list. Inappropriately adjusted equipment. When I do an in-person training like we're doing here, one of the things I always do is a demo of the chair that's used in wherever I happen to be doing that training. And the positive reactions you get are the kind of the surprise reactions you get from people that are like, oh, wow, I had no idea that chair did that. People are very scared to adjust their office chair. They're pretty confident that at least one of the paddles underneath the chair is going to eject them, right? So we tend to be very apprehensive about making adjustments to it. So the office chair is generally not well adjusted. And then, there's certainly other items in the office that we could probably do a better job of as well. So our workstation layout, if we're doing unnecessary reaching, all those things will add to it. Static postures, as I mentioned, or sedentary, where we're not moving around a lot. And then, we all have different physical responses to stress. For some of us, it sits in the form of muscular tension, and often that's in the upper back, shoulders, and neck. So if you're having a bad day, or if you're really, working towards a deadline, and your physical response to that is to get some tension in your shoulders and neck or upper back, and then you combine that with maybe, excuse me, maybe your chair is not set quite correctly, all of a sudden we can get a lot of things that are kind of working against us to potentially cause some discomfort. So number of opportunities to or a number of things that can cause us issues. So there's obviously lots of opportunities to help ourselves too, which is good. So if we kind of compare and contrast these two pictures, we've helped you a little bit. You can see the red shading on the left version of this individual seated kind of implies that that's probably not what we're aiming for, and it's not. You can see they're kind of leaning forward, they're slouching a little bit. If you look at the picture on the right, this is what we're aiming for in terms of a back posture. So when we talk about sitting up straight, sitting upright, having a straight back, it's a little bit of a misnomer in the sense that when we do sit up straight, there's actually this gentle S-curve to our back. So although we appear straight and we are straight, we're upright, our back has this natural curve to it. And that curve is very important because when we're in that position that you see in the picture on the right, the pressure on our intervertebral discs is evenly distributed. So you can kind of see there's big blocks in the spine, and then there's in the spinal column, and then there's smaller blocks. So the big blocks are the bones, and the little blocks are the intervertebral discs. And those discs are there to provide cushioning between the bones. When we're in this gentle S-curve, the pressure on those discs is evenly distributed, which is great. So the discs are there to provide the cushioning and also to provide some space for the nerves that are coming out from the spinal column to the various areas of the body. When we keep those in the posture we see there, less pressure on those discs, they wear and tear less. When we do more of what you see in the picture on the left, we put extra pressure on those discs, and over time they shrink, and at some point we can have an impingement on those nerves that are coming out, and that's where some of our back pain and neck pain can come from. So what are some things we can do? Well, first thing that's very helpful is something as simple as making sure we're sitting and facing forward. Okay, so we see a couple different examples of possible locations for our hard copy reference documents. Now, a lot of us use dual monitors, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, but if we're looking at straight paper copies, you can see the picture on the left where we're looking down and to the left. It's a little more awkward. It's taking us out of that neutral posture, and it's going to be putting some uneven pressure on those discs. So I want you to, again, to do a little physical test with me. I want you to look up to the ceiling and then down to the floor, down to your workstation. So looking up and looking down, that should be fairly easy. I want you to look straight forward at the monitor that you're looking at, and then I want you to look left and look right. Okay, and again, those movements should be fairly easy. Now I want you to look down and to the left or down and to the right. So kind of like what you see in the picture on the left. And what you'll notice is when you combine those two movements, the looking down and looking left, or looking down and looking right, that's harder on our neck. Our neck doesn't like that. So we're really well equipped to look up and down, look left and right, but we want to try and avoid combining those movements when we can. All right. So in terms of adjusting your chair, chairs are going to come with different ranges of adjustability. Anytime I'm working with an organization, I'm working with a safety advisor, facilities people, HR, whoever happens to be engaging in our service, I tell my kind of contact in the organizations that I'm working with that, one of the easiest or one of the best things they can do if they're trying to help people is figure out what the adjustments are in the office chair that you have. If you only have one paddle like you see on the chair here, chances are it really only goes up and down. If you've got 3 paddles on that right side underneath your chair, chances are it goes up and down, and you have a backrest adjustment and possibly a seat pan adjustment. If you've got more than that, you might have a seat slider. Really, it is, you know, if you've got multiple adjustments on a chair and you're not sure what they are, you're not getting the value out of that chair potentially is providing. So I would really encourage you within your organization, if you don't know how the chair adjusts, if you don't know what the chair is, maybe talk to your facilities people and try and find out what it is. Most manufacturers, most of the bigger manufacturers will have a brochure that you can find online. If you know what the name of it is and you go to YouTube and you put a search in on it, chances are someone's done an adjustment video for it. And really, once you show people how to adjust a chair, if you become comfortable with making those adjustments, it's super helpful, right? You can really really help the folks that are in your organization with their setup. So things that not all chairs will have, but many will have, is an adjustable lumbar support. So if we're adjusting the lumbar support, we need to have it to support our lumbar curve. So you can see here on the picture on the left, individuals standing up, they're finding kind of what I would refer to as the small of their back. You want to find it while you're standing. It's much easier to do. Next thing you want to do is sit down with your palm facing backwards, and then either you yourself or you have somebody help adjust that lumbar support up and down until it's basically filling in that gap. A lot of chairs have sort of a hands-free adjustment where there's no knobs or anything. It's just on a ratcheting system. You can pull the backrest up, and then when it gets to the top, it's going to fall back down. Other chairs are on a post system where there's a knob where you loosen it and you move it up and down, and then you need to lock it. That's kind of more of a two-person operation. If you've got kind of one of the mesh back chairs, and even some of the foam ones, sometimes you'll see two little plastic pieces on either side of the chair that move up and down. That's a wire that's basically centering the lumbar support. But really, if we put the lumbar support in place, it helps maintain that gentle S-curve in our back. So if you have that adjustment available, I would encourage you to make use of it. If you're not really sure, try and track down who the chair is, what the chair is, talk to the facilities person, and become comfortable with some of those adjustments. I've got just some examples of some lower or no cost solutions if we are working from home and we don't have a proper task chair. This kind of information was really of interest early in the pandemic when we were kind of at home and we didn't know how long we were going to be home. Now I think more people have kind of got set whether they're going to be working hybrid or fully from home or whether they've gone back to the office. I really do encourage people, if you're going to be working more of your time at home, to get a proper task chair. I would always spend more money on a task chair than I would on the desk, because there's some low cost solutions to get a desk that's at an appropriate height, whereas the chair, to get kind of all the adjustments that you would want, is going to cost you a little bit more money. So if everyone's on a budget, everyone's budget's a little bit different, but I would put my money towards a chair if I had to make a decision. But here are some low cost solutions to improving kind of a not ideal chair, we'll say. So if you're working at a table and it's too high and you've got a fixed height chair like we see here, simply adding a pillow or cushion underneath is one way of raising the seat. If that then results in your feet not being flat on the floor, you've got some old textbooks, you've got a low cost footrest. And then if the seat is too long for you, or you're finding you don't have adequate low back support, which you wouldn't typically in a dining room or a kitchen chair, adding a pillow in is a way of making that work. Again, I would consider all of these kind of temporary solutions. And if you're going to be working from home on a more regular basis, I would definitely encourage getting a more purpose-built task chair. All right. So we're going to keep moving. We're going to go to the hands and wrists next. To the back, we obviously have lots of complaints just because of the nature of potentially sitting in the majority of the day. The next area, probably of most prevalent concern, is the hands and wrists, the upper limb. We're doing lots of keying. Some of us have still some hard paperwork, but the hands and wrists are an area that we commonly hear of complaints. So the same sort of primary risk factors that we talked about earlier: awkward postures, high force and repetition. As I said, in the office, high force is not generally a concern. It's more unnecessary force. And then the other one I would add is contact stress, or resting against hard edges. And this, you can see a good example of this here. This person's working at a surface that's too low for them. They're resting their wrists on a very hard surface, and that's going to be putting some compression on the soft tissues in their wrist and palm there. So here are some examples. Work surface too high, too low. Basically what we're aiming for is we want to have our wrists straight. We'll see a good example of that here in a minute. So here's what we're aiming for, whether we're seated or standing. When our shoulders are relaxed, we want the keyboard surface at about elbow height. And I really do focus on the shoulder relaxed part, because lots of folks will have a desk that's a little too high for them. They can't get their chair high enough. And then what they'll do is raise the armrests up so that their wrists are straight, but then their shoulders are really shrugged. And I don't know how many people tell me that having shoulder discomfort or tight shoulders is normal when you work in an office. I would suggest it's not. It might be common. I don't think it's normal. I always tell people that we should be able to go to work pain-free. If we've got, some sort of underlying injury that we've done to ourselves, or that's happened, sure, there might be some base level discomfort, but you should be able to get set up in an office environment to work pain-free. You should be able to get set up in any environment to work pain-free. And if it's causing you discomfort, it's probably trying to, if you're doing a task and it's uncomfortable, that's your body's way of saying, hey, you know what, this is not working for me. We need to look at doing something different. So, so really the key here is we want to have our keyboard surface at about elbow height. And again, seated or standing, either way. Here's a good example of someone where work surface is too high. So you can imagine, they've got their feet flat on the floor. Let's say this chair is as high as it can go. Obviously, this is too high. What I was talking about on the previous slide is sometimes we will have people bump up the armrests to make those level with the surface that's too high, and then their shoulders pay the price instead. So, but this is also a good example when it is too high, when the work surface is too high, that we're more likely to have that contact stress on the wrists, in which we can see would occur here. And, if you look at the underside of your wrist or the underside of your forearm, a lot of soft tissue going through there. We've got muscles, tendons, nerves, and there's not a whole lot protecting it. So if we're resting on a hard edge, that's going to compress those tissues fairly quickly. So here's a graphic just kind of reinforcing what I was talking about before. So seated or standing, we're still aiming for elbow height. As I said at the outset of this particular section, high forces are less common, but unnecessary forces are sometimes seen. So, some examples, if you can hear someone typing 2 or 3 cubicles away for you, they are probably typing hard, pressing on the keys harder than they need to. We do see that from time to time. We also very commonly see people that hang on to the mouse when they don't need to. Not necessarily that they're gripping it too hard, but just that they're not letting go, right? So, and what happens there is I click the mouse. I know I'm going to click it again, but 5 seconds turns into 30 seconds or a minute, and I'm just hanging on to this thing when I don't need to. So really encourage people to get into the habit of using the mouse, letting go, using the mouse, letting go. Also, sometimes we'll see people, they might might be making notes while they're using the computer. So sometimes they'll leave a pen in their hand while they're using the mouse, or maybe doing some brief typing. If you're typing or using the mouse, do that. If you're writing, do that. Don't try and hang on to the pen when you're taking your short break. Okay, so those are the things that are going to be most important for the hands and wrists. Next part of the upper limb, of course, is the attachment point, the shoulders. So we already talked about one example, and you can see a good graphic on the left here. If somebody's got their shoulders raised, that's going to be uncomfortable. If we're doing lots of reaching, so we've got an example here of someone reaching for the telephone. I think more often we're conducting business on online meetings on Teams or Skype or whatever platform your organization uses. But we still have a telephone or other items that we're reaching for, that can certainly be of concern as well. So when we're setting up our work surface, sort of 3 work zones we're concerned with. So the primary work zone, so if you have your elbows in at your sides and you sweep your hands in front of you, primary work zone should have the items that we use most frequently throughout the day closest to us. So keyboard and mouse for many of us, might be the phone for some of you, might be coffee for some of you, right? The things that we're using all day, every day. Secondary reach zone are items that I can reach at arm's length without leaning forward. Okay, so those might be open files, that might be the telephone for some of you, right? And then everything outside of that is our reference zone. So I would encourage you, if you're sitting at your desk, take a look if the items that you're using most frequently, so presumably your keyboard and mouse are closest to you. And the second part of that is, are they in your primary reach zone? So can you reach them with your elbows underneath your shoulders? Quite often, people will have the items that they use most frequently closest to them, but they won't be close enough. So a good example of what happens here, if you have a notebook that you use a lot, quite often people will keep their notebook between their keyboard and their mouse. Sorry, between their body and their keyboard. So what happens then is the keyboard kind of creeps up into that blue zone and the book stays in the green zone. And if you're using the book more, that makes sense. But if you're using the keyboard as much or more than the notebook, we've put an extra strain on our shoulders because one of our primary items is a little too far away. Okay, so give that some thought. If you need to bring things closer, certainly encourage you to do that. That will definitely help relieve any discomfort you might have in your shoulders. Another area where we can put strain on our shoulders is certainly cradling the telephone. As I said, a hands-free headset is better. If you're in a private office, you use speakerphone. Like I said, we're seeing a lot more online stuff, and I think most of us have probably been working with a headset if we're doing lots of online meetings. So that certainly allows us to maintain a more neutral shoulder posture. Really, if you're doing any typing while you're on the phone, very hard to manage that headset. If you're, doing some simple clicking, yeah, you can probably use hold the handset, but more commonly, you're going to do what you see on the left. And if you're doing that for any period of time, that's going to certainly lead to some discomfort. All right, so we talked about the shoulders, kind of alluded to the neck a little bit, and we're going to get into that in a bit more detail here. So items that will have large impact on our level of comfort or discomfort in the neck, certainly our monitor placements. So if we're a little high, like we see on the left, or if it's a little low, like we see on the right. Our neck doesn't do well with static postures, particularly if they're out of neutral. Okay, so our neck is really good at moving, right? We did that little exercise earlier where you look up and down or left and right, pretty good at doing that. If we ask it to hold a posture that's outside of neutral, that becomes uncomfortable very quickly, puts a lot of strain on our body. So we want to focus on positioning ourselves in neutral, and monitor placement will have a big impact on that. All right, so we've seen this graphic before, these pictures before. We want to be looking straight forward. So when we go to look at our monitor position, we got a couple of things to consider. The first one is the height, which we see illustrated on the left. Basically, we want to have the top of the screen at or below eye level. Okay, and the reason for that is we look down naturally 10 to 15 degrees. If we're a reasonable distance from the monitor, which we'll talk about here in a second, we place the top of the screen at eye level. You look down 10 to 15 degrees, you're kind of comfortably looking in the middle. You look up for half, down for half. So that's the height. There's one exception to that, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then the second item is the distance. And you can see in the graphic on the right, sort of suggesting arm's length. Arm's length is a good starting point. Some of you will need to sit a little closer. Some of you will need to sit a little further. It really is dependent on the size of the monitor and your focal length. So that's going to be a little different for each of us. But we will adjust to the distance that we can comfortably see. So if you're having a hard time seeing, you're going to lean in if your monitor's too far away. Or, and this is something we definitely saw a lot over the last couple of years, people working on desks that are maybe not that deep, maybe only 20 or 22 inches deep, without a keyboard tray, feel like they're too close. So they're actually, we see lots of people pulling their chair back from the desk and reaching for the keyboard because they want to get further away from the monitors. Okay, so like I said, we will generally position our head where we can comfortably see, and it might be at the expense of some other part of our body because we're reaching or we're leaning forward and and putting extra pressure on our shoulders and neck. So I said there's one exception to the height being top of top of screen at eye level or just below, and that's for someone who's wearing bifocals or multifocals if they're looking at the bottom of the lens. So we kind of walk ourselves through this graphic here. If I set the top of the screen at eye level, if I need to tip my head back, that's going to be uncomfortable for my neck. So that's not going to work. So then I lower the screen and then that makes it work. So it's, I can't give you, it's 1 inch, 3 inches, 4 inches lower. It just needs to be lower so that the individual can look straight forward and not tip their head back or down. Okay, so that's a little bit of a trial and error. Height and distance will both play into that. All right, so in terms of visual discomfort, certainly a common issue, particularly, now that, a lot of in-person meetings have gone online. So, less and less time away from the screen. Visual discomfort is certainly prevalent. What are the common concerns? Glare, and we'll talk about that. That's basically any source of light. Our workstation arrangement. So, where monitors position relative to lights and different sources of light, whether it's natural light from windows or overhead lights. And then the last two are things that we have control over: uncorrected visual disorders and prolonged uninterrupted viewing. So, if first question I ask people when they report visual discomfort is, when did they last have their eyes checked, and what do they do about that? Oftentimes you go to the eye doctor and it's a minor change, and I understand that in any health insurance, vision is usually one of the kind of the worst coverages we have. It's every couple of years. When you get all the items that your eye doctor suggests you get, you're still probably out of pocket a little bit. So often we'll keep going with the prescription that we have, and that can work. But we're probably, if the eye doctor is telling us we need a new prescription, it's to make it easier for us to see. So we want to do that. And then with prolonged uninterrupted viewing, we all spend a lot of time. We all spend a lot of time looking at the computer. But if you don't take visual breaks, if you don't look away from the screen from time to time, your eyes are going to become uncomfortable more quickly, and you're going to have greater incidence of visual discomfort. So we need to get into the habit of allowing ourselves time for focus change. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly. So when it comes to glare, as I said, it's any source of any source of light. It could be overhead lights, windows, reflections, and it could be light bouncing off your work surface. So we want to do what we can to control for that. So if we have the opportunity, we want to have our monitors perpendicular to windows, right? If we have our computer right in front of the window, we've got light shining in that window and into our eyes. If we have the window directly behind us, the light's going to shine over our shoulders and reflect off the screen. We can make use of blinds, and regardless of where your computer is in an office, there are going to be times when we do need to close our blinds. Task lighting, if you have a task light, it should be to illuminate stuff that needs more light. So that should be paperwork, not our screen. We talk about tilting our monitor. We want to have our monitor straight up and down. We want to have it perpendicular. If you have your monitor tipped back, if you've got an overhead light, which most of us do, you're going to have glare from that. So we want to have that straight up and down to help control for the glare. So here's a good example of some challenges with a laptop. So, we want to have the top of our screen just below eye level, whether we're looking at a laptop or an external screen. You can see the picture on the left. We have a laptop flat on the work surface, which looks to be a pretty good height for using the keyboard. The laptop is really low. The screen is really low, and we can see we've got our head tipped forward. A quick, easy solution, an inexpensive solution that gets it a little bit better. So we use a binder to prop it up a little bit. The keyboard surface is still basically at the correct height, but we're not looking down as much. But if we're using a laptop regularly, I always encourage that we separate the keyboard and mouse from the screen. Okay, so the least expensive way without getting an external monitor is simply to have the laptop screen propped up and then have an external keyboard and mouse. And we can see that that's promoting a much more neutral neck posture. Okay, same example, a home example here again. So this individual wants to stand. Really extreme, this individual is quite tall. So picture on the left, obviously even the keyboard's a little bit low. So they've used a combination of 3 boxes to get the keyboard and mouse up to the correct height, and then the laptop screen up to the right height as well. So I think that's a really nice, quick and simple, MacGyvered sit-stand solution, or standing solution at least. All right. So want to get into the importance of movement next. And really, if you think about how much of your day is stationary, so we've got the hours we're working, we've got the hours sleeping, our commuting time, which for some of us has probably reduced a little bit if we're spending at least some days at home, sitting for meals, sitting while we're watching TV. The point is there's lots of our day where we're stationary or sedentary, where we're not getting much movement. So the reason movement is important, and this is kind of a simplified version of this, but if you're sitting at your desk, your muscles are still working to help you maintain the posture that you're sitting in. So it's not they're not working as hard as if you were shoveling snow or something like that, but the muscles are still working. They still need oxygen, and they still need nutrients, which your blood flow brings to you. So if you're sitting there, which you've been, or maybe some of you have been standing listening to this, your blood flow is decreased when we're not moving around, but our muscles are still working, right? They need that oxygen, they need those nutrients, and we still have those waste products that build up when our muscles are doing work. Unless we get up and move around, there's nothing that really makes our heart pump, right? So, if you think about it, if you climb the stairs or if you go for a brisk walk, your breathing gets heavier, right? You can feel your heart rate pumping, and a couple things are happening there. You're breathing heavier because you're trying to bring in more oxygen. Your heart rate's pumping. Your heart your heart rate increases because you're trying to circulate more blood flow to all the areas of your body, which brings those oxygen and nutrients and brings those waste products away. Whereas if we stay in a fixed position, and maybe a simpler or better example of this is when I asked you to hold your arms out in front of you. In that example, your muscles are working quite hard, right, to hold your arms out. There's less blood flow because they're in the muscles are constricted, and there's nothing to make your heart pump. Whereas if you're going for a walk, or if you're shoveling snow or doing things like that, that tends to increase our heart rate and helps with the blood flow. So the main takeaway here is we need to get movement to get our blood pumping, get our heart pumping, get some blood flow, get that oxygen, get those nutrients, and that will help reduce sort of local muscle fatigue. Now, there are times when we don't necessarily have time to go for a walk, and there's still benefit to getting up and having a little stretch. It's better than not having the movement at all. Okay. So why don't people move? There's a whole list here. I would say the most important one is the one in the middle, which is habit. If you have a habit to just sit there and work through things and not get up and move, you're going to continue to do that. If you build a habit where you get up and have those little movements at least once an hour and maybe some longer movements a couple times during the day, then that's going to be what you're going to do, right? So if you don't move a whole lot, I would really encourage you to try and develop that habit. And there are different things that you can do to help with that, which we'll touch on again here shortly. So a whole bunch of different examples here. Really, we want to be getting up at least once an hour. Some things you can do. The more water you drink, the more you've got to get up to the washroom. If you're really having a hard time remembering, you can set a reminder. Rob's going to send out in the links at the end of this presentation. We've developed a little break reminder that's not an app. It's just a web page you open. You just have it open in a browser, so you don't need to download or install anything. You can set how often you want it to remind you. You can minimize it, and then it will flash when it's time to get up and move. Like I said, once you get into the habit of doing that, you're not going to need the reminders. It's just a matter of building that habit. Talking about speaking with coworkers in person, that's kind of, if everyone's in the office. I know now we've got lots of people who are working hybrid, and maybe that's less of a possibility. But if you have the opportunity to get up and see someone as opposed to emailing or online calling with them, I think that allows us to get some more movement as well. So in terms of training that's available, these are both available on the AMHSA site. Rob will send the links out to these in the email that we have. He's got some resources specifically from our website. There's a quick checklist you can go through. There's some links to our break reminder. So I'd encourage you to check those out as well. And with that, I will open it up for questions.